welcome to your very first writing video. So far I've just been doing math ones, but the next writing unit is a little bit tricky with all the different sentence types that you're going to be looking at. It gets a lot into grammar, sentence structure, so I thought it would be useful to make a video to just go over the types of sentences that are going to come up. And then if you have any questions throughout the unit, you come across a type of sentence, you can't quite remember what it is from grammar class, you can jump back to the video and watch it and hopefully figure it out from there. So the first type of sentence we're going to look at is the simple sentence. And a simple sentence is made up of a subject and a predicate. So a who or a what, and then the predicate is the verb or describing words that come along with the verb. And what's important about a simple sentence is that it expresses a complete thought. So when you are writing, whoever is reading your writing shouldn't be left with any questions after reading your sentence. So for instance, went to the store is not a complete thought because the reader is thinking in their head, who went to the store? There is some missing information, so that is a fragment. So a simple sentence has to express a complete thought. So some examples of simple sentences. To fix the problem of the fragment on the previous slide, I can say I went to the store or Joe went to the store. So we have a subject and then we have a predicate, so a verb and then describing words that come after it. All right, but simple sentences get a little bit more complicated because you can have what are called compound subjects. We've looked at these in grammar before. So it's when you have two people or more acting as one subject. So here we have Amy and Megan, two different people, but they're actually acting as one subject. Okay, same thing can happen with verbs. You can have compound verbs. So now I have they, so I just have one word acting as my subject, but then they're doing two different things. They skipped and jumped down the hall. That's acting as a compound predicate. Okay, so if you see two verbs or if you see two people at the beginning of your sentence, don't be confused. Those are still simple sentences. They just have either a compound subject or a compound verb. Or they could, as in this sentence, have a compound subject and compound verb. Okay, so don't be confused by those two things. The next type of sentence is a compound sentence. And a compound sentence is just when you take two simple sentences and you join them together into one sentence. So we've got two simple sentences and they are joined by a semicolon or a comma and conjunction. Okay, and you should remember from grammar, this should ring a bell, the fanboys, to help us remember those conjunctions, for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are our joining words that you can use to join two simple sentences into a compound sentence. So some examples of that. I went to the store, but she went to the bank. I went to the store is a complete thought on its own. It can be a simple sentence. I went to the store. She went to the bank can also be a complete thought. It could stand on its own. There are no questions that arise. You're not wondering who went to the bank. You're not wondering what they did. We know she went to the bank. And you'll notice that it is joined, I kind of covered it up, but really, really important, joined by a comma and then one of those conjunctions. Okay, so we're combining those two simple sentences into one. And then another thing that you can do, that's not as common, but you can join your two simple sentences with a semicolon. That also works. This is also an example of a compound sentence. It's just a different type of punctuation. All right, but there's a couple things you should be aware of when making compound sentences, a couple of problems that you could run into. So sometimes when you're making a compound sentence, you make what is called a run-on sentence, which is a very bad thing. A run-on sentence is trying to be a compound sentence, but it is missing the proper punctuation. So this first example here, I went to the store, she went to the bank. We've got two things that are run together. We need some punctuation in between the two simple sentences. It's completely missing punctuation in this example. Now, sometimes what I'll see students do is they will try to make a compound sentence and they'll almost get it. So for our second example here, They know that there needs to be some punctuation in the middle, but they don't have enough. A comma on its own is not strong enough to combine two simple sentences. You need to have a comma and then a conjunction, okay? And the same goes also for just having a conjunction with no comma. You have to have a comma and a conjunction. They need to work together to combine those two simple sentences. So just be really, really careful when you're writing. That's one of the most common writing errors that I see. And then one more, not so common, but it does come up a few times, is when you're trying to make a compound sentence, but you're making it too compound. Okay, you're putting too many things in your sentence, too much information joined by too many conjunctions. So here's an example here. You're writing, I saw a bear lumbering through the woods, and the air smelled like pine, but as I listened, I could hear him breathing, and he was a giant with huge limbs and dark brown fur, and his eyes gleamed at me through the trees. Too much information for one sentence. There are conjunctions all over the place, right? We've got and he was a huge giant, and his fur gleamed. Maybe I missed some. Lots and lots of information. Oh, found one more. Lots of information, too much information for one sentence. It's all good, it's all fine information, but you just have to chop it up because it's just rambling on and on and on. So make sure that you also watch out for that. All right, the next type of sentence we're going to look at is the complex sentence, and it's a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more complicated. But what you have for a complex sentence is a complete thought joined with an incomplete thought, and you're joining them with a subordinating conjunction. We're going to come back to that in a minute, so just hang on to that. But a complex sentence, we've got a complete thought, or you can think about it like a simple sentence joined with an incomplete thought or a fragment. Now, your writing books call your complete thoughts or your simple sentences independent clauses, but it's just a different term for the same thing, okay? And maybe the term is actually kind of helpful, because if you think to yourself, well, if you're independent, it means that you can do something on your own. You don't need any help to do it. So an independent clause can be a sentence on its own. It doesn't need any help. Whereas a dependent clause is the opposite of that. It needs the help of an independent clause in order to be a sentence. Okay? We'll come back to subordinating conjunctions in a minute. Let's just look at complex sentences first. So here we have an example. I solved many problems during math class. Now this first green section here could stand on its own as a sentence. I solved many problems is a complete thought. So this would be an example of an independent clause. However, the purple during math class cannot stand on its own. It doesn't make sense. We're missing information. It's a dependent clause. It depends on the first part of the sentence to make sense. Okay? And what you can do with complex sentences, you can have your independent clause first, or you can swap it around and have your dependent clause first and then your independent clause later. But there's one important difference. When you put your dependent clause first, you have to put a comma after it for it to make sense. So during math class, comma, I solved many problems. Okay? Now, going back to those subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunctions, they're kind of like our fanboys conjunctions because they are joining sentences, but they are only used in complex sentences. And during would be an example of one of those subordinating conjunctions. The one that is probably used most often would be because. All right, and I'll just jump to my last slide here for a minute. Week 2, day 1 has a list of those subordinating conjunctions. So if you need to take a look at a few more examples of those, that is where you will find them. Well, let's look at one more example of these complex sentences to make sure that you get it. And how about I pull a Dora the Explorer, and I'll just wait while you think about my question. So my question is, in example number 1, does the dependent clause or the independent clause come first? Just take a minute, think about it. I'll wait for you. All right, if you need more thinking time, pause it now. because I'm about to tell you the answer. So for sentence number 1, because it was so hot. If you just read that first part of the sentence by itself, you understand that there's some missing information. Because it was so hot cannot stand alone. You're wondering what's going to happen because it was so hot. So the first one would be a dependent clause first. Another clue that you may have seen was that the comma was right there. So that's a big clue that the dependent clause is coming first. And I jumped in the lake. That's a complete thought. It is an independent clause. So it could stand alone. The dependent clause cannot stand alone. And then for our second example, it's just reworded with the dependent clause at the end. I jumped in the lake because it was so hot. So hopefully that clears up any confusion you may have for these different types of sentences. But if it doesn't clear up confusion and you still need my help, as always, give me a call. I'm happy to help you. I'm happy to explain the different types of sentences in more detail should you need it.